The Yellow River is the cradle of Chinese civilization. For millennia, it flooded reliably, depositing the fertile silt that made the North China Plain one of the most productive agricultural regions on Earth. It was called China's sorrow. Not because it was dying, but because it was too powerful, too unpredictable, too wild to be fully controlled. Today, the Yellow River runs dry at its mouth for significant parts of the year. The aquifers beneath the North China Plain, which took thousands of years to fill, are being drained faster than any natural process can replenish them. 400 million people depend on a water system that is failing. China's response to this crisis is the largest water infrastructure project in human history, an engineering undertaking so vast that calling it a canal system is like calling the Great Wall a fence. They did not conserve the water, they moved the river. The South-North Water Diversion Project is, by almost every measure, the most ambitious engineering project currently operating on Earth. 3 separate diversion routes, over 2,400 kilometers of canals, tunnels, and aqueducts. A price tag that has already exceeded $80 billion and is still climbing. Enough water moved annually to supply the entire residential needs of California twice over. The engineering is real. The water is moving. The northern cities that were running out of water are receiving it. But here is the question that the Chinese government does not answer in its official project documentation, and that the international community has been too diplomatically cautious to ask loudly. When you take that much water from the south and move it north, what happens to everything downstream of where the water used to go? And what happens when cloud seeding over the Tibetan Plateau, China's other major water intervention, starts compounding those downstream effects? That question has an answer. And it is the reason this video exists. Most international coverage of China's water management focuses on the South-North Water Diversion Project. The canals are visible. The engineering is documented. The scale is impossible to hide. What receives almost no international coverage is what China is doing to the atmosphere above the Tibetan Plateau, and what effect that atmospheric intervention has on the water that flows from Tibet into 9 downstream countries. The Tibetan Plateau is sometimes called the third pole because it holds more fresh water in its glaciers and snowpack than anywhere on Earth outside the Arctic and Antarctic. The rivers that originate here supply fresh water to approximately 2 billion people across Asia. China's Tianhe project, Sky River in English, is a cloud seeding program specifically targeting the Tibetan Plateau and the atmospheric moisture flows that cross it. The stated goal is to increase annual precipitation over the plateau by 10 billion cubic meters per year. Water that would flow into Chinese river systems and supplement both the South-North diversion and the failing Yellow River Basin. 10 billion cubic meters. To put that in context, the entire annual flow of the Colorado River, the river supplying water to 40 million Americans, is approximately 16 billion cubic meters. China is attempting to manufacture 2/3 of a Colorado River worth of additional water per year by seeding clouds over the Tibetan Plateau. Here is the atmospheric mechanism that makes this a downstream problem and not just a Chinese domestic policy. The moisture that cloud seeding captures over Tibet, causing it to fall as rain or snow on Chinese territory, is moisture that was traveling somewhere else. Atmospheric moisture does not have a Chinese component and an Indian component. It is a single connected flow of water vapor moving across the continent according to wind patterns and pressure systems. When China seeds clouds over Tibet and causes precipitation that would not have occurred naturally, it is extracting moisture from a flow that downstream countries were depending on. Without asking them, without notifying them, and without any framework for compensating them if their rainfall decreases as a result. This is the Iran-Israel problem, which we covered in video 4. operating at 10 times the geographic scale, with 10 times as many people affected, and with a country 10 times as powerful doing the seeding. Let's trace what happens when the world's most populous country simultaneously diverts its largest river and seeds clouds over the watershed that supplies water to 2 billion people downstream. Effect 1. The Mekong, a river, being managed to death. The Mekong River flows from the Tibetan Plateau through 6 countries before emptying into the South China Sea. It is the primary water and food source for approximately 70 million people in the lower basin, one of the most densely populated and food-insecure regions on Earth. China has built 11 large dams on the upper Mekong, called the Lancang in China. Those dams regulate flow, capture sediment, and give China operational control over how much water reaches downstream countries at any given time. When cloud seeding over the Tibetan Plateau captures additional moisture and causes it to precipitate into Chinese river systems, the Lancang Mekong among them, it increases the water available for Chinese dam reservoirs to store, while potentially reducing the atmospheric moisture that would have produced natural rainfall in the lower Mekong basin. Lower natural rainfall in Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Lower river flows from Chinese-controlled dams. Both effects simultaneously, both driven by the same upstream intervention. The 70 million people in the lower Mekong basin are experiencing the downstream consequences of decisions made on the Tibetan Plateau, and they have no seat at the table where those decisions are made. Effect 2. India and the Brahmaputra. India's relationship with the Brahmaputra is existential. The river supplies water to hundreds of millions of people in Assam and Bangladesh, and it originates entirely within Chinese-controlled Tibet before entering Indian territory. China is currently constructing a hydroelectric dam on the upper Brahmaputra that will be the largest dam in human history, generating 3 times the power of the Three Gorges Dam. It will give China operational control over the flow of the most water-critical river in South Asia. Combined with cloud seeding over the Tibetan headwaters of the Brahmaputra, capturing atmospheric moisture that would naturally produce precipitation in the Assam Valley below, China holds a form of hydrological leverage over India that Indian strategic planners describe, in the carefully measured language of official documents, as a significant national security concern. Significant national security concern is Indian diplomatic language for "this keeps us awake at night." Effect 3. The countries that cannot respond. The downstream countries most affected by China's combined diversion and cloud seeding program share one characteristic that makes their situation particularly difficult. None of them have the economic, military, or diplomatic power to make China change anything. Laos has pursued one available strategy: become economically dependent on Chinese infrastructure investment, making confrontation impossible without destroying its own development financing. Cambodia has pursued the same path for the same reason. Bangladesh has no upstream leverage at all. It sits at the end of multiple river systems, receiving whatever reaches it after China, India, and other upstream actors have taken what they need. This is not a dispute that international law can currently resolve. No treaty covers upstream cloud seeding effects on downstream rainfall. No court has jurisdiction over atmospheric moisture competition between sovereign states. The water flows downhill. The power flows the same direction. Effect 4. The data China won't share here is the detail that atmospheric scientists studying downstream effects find most frustrating. Accurately modeling the downstream effects of China's cloud seeding program over Tibet requires access to China's operational seeding data. Which clouds were seeded, when, with what material, at what altitude, and with what documented results. China shares some meteorological data through international frameworks. It does not share operational cloud seeding data at the resolution needed for downstream attribution studies. which means that the countries most affected by China's atmospheric interventions cannot even measure the effects, because they don't have access to the operational parameters needed to separate China's contribution from natural climate variability. The moisture was taken. The evidence was clouds. Here is the conclusion I want to be precise about, because this story is easy to tell in a way that is unfair, and I want to tell it in a way that is accurate. China's water crisis is real. The North China Plain genuinely is running out of water. 400 million people genuinely face a water supply failure without intervention. The South-North Water Diversion Project is a response to a genuine emergency, not an act of aggression. The Tianhe cloud seeding program over Tibet is a response to the same emergency. China is not seeding clouds over the Tibetan Plateau to harm India or Cambodia or Vietnam. It is trying to solve a water deficit that, left unsolved, would produce humanitarian consequences of staggering scale within its own borders. The problem is not intent. The problem is that solving China's water crisis through upstream diversion and atmospheric moisture capture creates downstream water deficits in countries that are not consulted, not compensated, and not powerful enough to demand either. And here's the conclusion that ties every video in this series together. The global water crisis is not a collection of separate national problems. It is a single, interconnected atmospheric and hydrological system that every country is drawing from simultaneously, seeding its clouds, diverting its rivers, depleting its aquifers, and making unilateral decisions that affect downstream populations who have no voice in those decisions. China is the largest and most powerful actor doing this, but it is not the only one. The United States diverts rivers. India is building upstream dams on the Brahmaputra. Turkey controls the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates above Syria and Iraq. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam is reshaping the Nile below Egypt. The surprise is not that China moved a river. The surprise is that we built a civilization of 8 billion people on a shared water system, and then let every country manage their piece of it as if the others did not exist. Next week is the final video of this series, and it is the one that took the longest to decide how to end. We are covering Israel, the country that, by almost every metric, has come closest to actually solving its water crisis. The technology is real, the results are real, and the part of the story that never makes it into the international coverage is the part that changes everything you think you know about what a water solution actually costs. Subscribe. The last one matters.